Hi, so today I will be covering 3 topics that argue the existence of God and whether there is one, or whether or not this supernatural being has any existence in the universe or existence at all. The 3 beliefs that we'll be covering this topic is atheism, theism, and agnosticism.
Well, actually, atheism isn't a belief system. You see... Wait, what? She's not done defining it?
And I'm going to begin by defining atheism and what it is and what it means to, or what the widely held beliefs are when it comes to atheism. So atheism is the belief that a supernatural being does not exist.
Well, yeah, kind of, but I wouldn't say it's a belief. It's like a lack of a belief, but whatever. I mean, basically, you got it kind of right. I mean, you could have looked it up, and that would have, you know, resolved the whole thing, and you could have actually presented a coherent definition, but, you know, this is fine too, I guess.
There is no God, and God is not real. A lot of people characterize atheists as rejectors of God or rejectors of the moral rulings or moral standings.
A lot? Really? Who? Where? When? What? Who? What? When did this happen? Citation? No, you don't have any. Okay.
That God and a lot of religions carry, but this isn't the case for their definition. It is not the rejection of God's moral standings or God's rulings on humans, but it's more that God just doesn't exist in general. Just God is not real. So there is no reason to have this belief, or there's no reason to believe that God is real, or there's no reason to believe that God exists.
Yeah, this isn't really that complicated, but because you didn't look it up, here we are. Yeah, so moving on.
There are many theories that atheists hold about the creation of the universe, because the belief that God doesn't exist and that God didn't make the world or the universe surrounding it. And one of the most famous theories is currently the evolutionary theory, which is that the universe was conceived from a very small particle that held millions of atoms, and it exploded, and over time, over millions of years, it slowly created the universe and animals, humans, space, and everything in it.
So evolution is biological in nature, biological evolution, usually what we mean by evolution. And cosmology is its own separate discipline. And so you've confused these two things together into one. And because of that, now I'm here explaining that you were wrong. And it might have been a good idea to look up evolution and cosmology to know what they are, so that you could present these ideas in at least halfway coherent manner instead of mixing them together, and then I wouldn't have to complain about it. I mean, if you had done that, I'd probably complain about something else, because I'm not going to not complain, but I wouldn't be complaining about this. But yet, here I am. So, don't do that.
We know what atheism is. Some of the there are definitely some criticisms that I have about the atheistic belief, and one of them, I'll begin with this one. I've seen arguments for atheism where they don't necessarily prove that there isn't that there's proof for the non-existence of God. They more just attack the other side.
You see, the burden of proof is the thing is very
universal negative.
nuanced. The metaphysics of the ultimate realities is the one inverse. When you reverse the burden of proof, what you get universal negative is one that cannot be disproven. And that's kind of a problem. Looks like my explaining the burden of proof has caused a fraction in space and time, causing other versions of me that have also explained the burden of proof in the past to appear at the same time. I do apologize for that technical difficulty. But essentially, the burden is not on us to prove a universal negative. You can't do that. The burden is upon the one making the positive claim, typically.
And say that it is impossible or that it's illogical to think that there is a God, and that science is the answer to everything. But the problem with this is that they're relying on something just like the people that are relying on God to prove the existence of humans, and that is science. So technically, if humans created science, and humans are imperfect, and humans were made, or humans were constructed for natural selection, or the benefit, or for ideas that benefit humans, and that it changes in their minds whether or not it benefits them biologically. The issue with this is that the same argument can be made towards atheism, and that atheism was constructed for the biological benefit of humans.
So, at best, you have the logical fallacy of tu quoque, you as well. You're doing the same thing that I'm doing. Humans made up God as an explanation to humans. Humans made up science as an explanation to humans. So we're both doing the same thing. We both made up an explanation to explain everything. So, really, we're both in the same boat here.
And that the belief that God does not exist only is that belief because it benefits humans biologically, and this argument can be made against atheists, and I believe it's a very strong argument because they put this belief, or put this criticism onto many religions when it comes to theism or pantheism. It's very much a circular reasoning, and it can be applied to their argument as well. So I think that needs to be considered before completely shutting down any belief in theism.
Your construct straw man is very malformed. Thus, your criticisms of it are rather incoherent. I'm trying to understand what argument you think that the atheist is making. And I have to completely guess at what you're trying to say here, because what you've said is just not well formatted. Are you saying that atheists are making the argument that God has been invented in order to fulfill certain biological needs, and that the counter to that, therefore, would be that not God was created to fulfill some biological need? In either case, the correct fallacy in this argument would be genetic fallacy, not circular argumentation. Perhaps adding to the list of things that you should look into, research, and study, you might want to add logic to that list as well, because you might know some logical fallacies names, but I think it's fair to say you have no idea how to utilize logic. And that's not an insult, it's just an observation.
The next belief that I'm going to cover is theism. And theism can be considered almost or actually it can be considered just the complete opposite of atheism. And theism is the belief that there is one supreme being, or one God. And
I have to correct you on even this. What you're referring to is monotheism. Theism in general just describes a belief in a god at least, but it could also describe a belief in many gods. That's where the term pantheism comes in. But if you're not distinguishing between the two by saying monotheism or pantheism, but simply using the term theism, it could refer to either.
There are arguments over whether God is immanent in the physical realm or not, and whether the supernatural being has any influence on humans whatsoever, or anything like that, if human consciousness is affected by God or anything like that. And so Paul Tillich had a very good quote when it comes to covering whether God is immanent in the human consciousness or the material world, and he says that.
So Paul Tillich was a Christian philosopher, so at best this would support Christian theology, perhaps. And if you were attempting to do an essay style presentation, then citing somebody like this could be beneficial. But your style of presentation doesn't seem to be an essay style format. So is it an argumentation style format? No, it can't be that either, because you haven't given any syllogism, and quoting somebody in an argument would be irrelevant. The argument needs to stand or fail on its own merits.
So God does exist physically, but he is boundless, and we exist in God, if that makes sense. So the fact that God can be argued whether he exists in the physical realm or not, I believe when it comes to his immanence, I believe that we are, or he is immanent, but he has no effect on the material world or the things that we see right now, like in the universe.
Okay, so that's a deistic God. I've never heard of a deistic God being referred to as he or she, but fair enough, it's your belief. You can believe whatever you want to about God, and I don't have anything one way or the other to say about it, since it's just a belief. When somebody has a belief statement, they incur no burden of proof. So if you say, I believe God is X, Y, and Z, I have no problem with that. I have questions, certainly, but I have no rebuttals to it. On the flip side, if somebody says, I don't believe that God is in X, Y, or Z, or even a thing, also, there's no rebuttal to make, no burden of proof. A belief statement or a lack of belief statement both negate a burden of proof, because they are beliefs. It's only when you enter the realm of fact do you incur the burden of proof. If one says that there is a God and it is X, Y, and Z, then they incur the burden of proof to show that there's a God and that it is X, Y, and Z. And on the flip side, if they say there is no God, then they do have some burden of proof.
There are many ways to go about this belief, as is shown by the arguments that people make when talking about theism. And another contention when it comes to theism is the multitude of religions that stem from this one belief. There are so many arguments and so many questions when it comes to theism, like, is God all-knowing? Does this God exist in the physical world? Will we ever see God, or is it impossible to physically or spiritually see him? And a criticism I can make about theism is that there are so many unanswered questions and so much debate on what is correct. It's almost futile to argue over these points or beliefs, because currently we have no access to a spiritual realm, or if someone does, you know, it's very small. So answering these questions when we don't know or don't have any evidence towards them is very it's very difficult to choose an argument, or choose whether or not the belief of certain characteristics of God applies to him, or applies to it actually.
It's very good of you to reflect on the problems of theism. And for that, I give you a lot of credit and a lot of props. Had this been your video, I wouldn't have made any response to it. Had you presented the problems that you see present in theism and reflected upon them, maybe even working through them, there'd be nothing to really fix there. And that does require self-reflection. But I think that the problem is even deeper than you went into here. What is God? That is to say, what makes a thing a God in the first place? What attributes must a thing possess in order to be considered a God? And then how do we know that those are the attributes that make something a God? Or is it that it's God and then it has those attributes? How would we even know any of that? And as you said, if we can't access this spiritual realm, then what are we even talking about unless God's not in a spiritual realm? In fact, is there even a spiritual realm? In fact, what does the word spiritual really mean, and can it even have a realm? There's more questions than answers. But perhaps there is an answer. It is just one that, as somebody that believes in any type of God, might be one that you dislike. And the answer might be that God is simply an invention of humans, and as such, it can be anything that we want it to be. Fair enough, you could say it could also be that we don't want God to be at all, and so we simply invent that it isn't a thing. But the question must be, how do we determine what is or isn't a thing? And that question will lead you into the study of epistemology, which is something I think you ought to study and take very seriously.
The belief that I'm covering is agnosticism, and this can be seen as somewhere in the middle between atheism and theism.
But no, not really. That's not what agnosticism really is. This would have been another good place for you to look up what agnosticism is, how it works, look through different definitions, look at different outlines of it, and really try to understand it, not just say that it's in between the two, because it's really not. Alright, I've taken enough of your time. My video is intended as constructive criticism. It's not meant to attack you, but to attack your presentation and your argument. You don't really have the foundation of any particular argument here, and framing this as you did with these three things being belief systems reveals that you don't really understand what atheist, what agnostic means, because they are not belief systems. Theism is a belief system, but the other two are not, and simply looking that up would have informed you of what they are. And then you could put that into your own words, and that would make a better presentation. So, in summary, learn how to construct a proper essay, learn logic, learn how to construct a syllogism, and continue to learn and grow. Thank you for listening. Take care. Honestly, have no idea what argument you're talking about, since you're not directly